The email from my lawyer was just one line, all in capital letters. Alisha, call me immediately. I thought it was about my will, but when I heard the tremor in his voice, I knew it was about the sweet girl my son had just married and the $250,000 I had just given them. The name Catherine Blackwood felt foreign on my tongue, cold and sharp. It didn't have the warmth of Maya, a name that sounded like sunshine. I ended the call, but my hand wouldn't unclench from the phone, the plastic groaning under the pressure. My new apartment, the one I'd called my sensible next step, suddenly felt cavernously quiet. It was in that crushing silence I first understood that a home isn't made of walls and a roof. It's made of the people you trust inside them. And I think I had just handed the keys to a monster, but before I get ahead of myself, would you do an old woman a small favor? Just a little like or a comment to let me know where you're listening from. Knowing someone is out there right now would mean more than you know. You know, the hardest part of selling the house you lived in for 37 years isn't packing the boxes. It's the smells you leave behind. The faint, comforting scent of old oak from my husband's study, a ghost that lingered long after he was gone. The phantom sweetness of sugar cookies that clung to the kitchen, even when the oven was cold. That's what I sold. I told myself I wasn't selling memories. I was investing in the future. A future where my son James could finally build a home of his own with the woman he loved. When I signed the closing papers, my hand was steady. I even managed a smile for the realtor. I truly believed it was the ultimate act of a mother's unconditional love. Looking back on it now, I see it for what it was. The first in a long line of very, very costly mistakes. The first time James brought Maya home for Sunday dinner, I remember thinking my son had won the lottery. Maya was a pediatric nurse, and she had the kind of radiant smile that could soothe a crying baby, or, as it turned out, a wary mother-in-law. She had listening eyes, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. She didn't just ask how I was doing. She'd remember the details. She'd gently remind me to take my blood pressure medication on time. One afternoon, she showed up with a brand new pair of Skechers, telling me she'd read an article that said the memory foam soles were the best thing for arthritis. It was such a thoughtful, simple gesture. She spoke so beautifully about wanting a big family, about how she couldn't wait for me to be a huge part of her future children's lives. She said all the things a lonely mother aches to hear. Looking back, I see she wasn't building a relationship. She was building a bridge, one carefully chosen plank at a time, straight into the center of my heart. And I walked across it, so gratefully, never once thinking to look down and see what was waiting on the other side. It wasn't a family. It was a trap. The full $750,000 from the sale of my home sat in my savings account. It was a formidable number on a screen, but to me, it felt like a warm, heavy blanket. It was my husband's hard work, my careful savings. It was my security. James and Maya sat across from me on my floral sofa, their hands intertwined. Maya laid out a plan, and it sounded so perfect, so sensible. $250,000. Not the whole amount, just a piece. A portion for what she called a dream wedding, and the rest for a down payment on their first house. I remember her exact words, her voice so earnest. "Alisha," she said, leaning forward, "this isn't a gift. Think of it as your investment in the happiness of our family." And it felt so right, so logical. I pulled out my checkbook from the desk drawer. My hand trembled just slightly as I wrote out the long string of zeros. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was everything. It was trust. It was handing them the key to my own future, believing they would keep it safe. I didn't realize I was also handing her the weapon she would use to shatter it. About a week after the check cleared, an email popped up in my inbox. The sender was Robert, my lawyer. The subject line was just 4 words, all in capital letters. Alisha, call me immediately. My first thought was that it had to be a clerical error with the house sale, some forgotten document that needed a signature. Robert had been our family's lawyer for over 20 years. He'd handled my husband's will with a quiet competence that was immensely comforting. His voice had always been the sound of calm reason. But when I called him back, the calm was gone. There was an edge to his voice, a tautness I'd never heard before. My heart started beating a little faster. Robert, is everything all right? I asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for a knot to form in my stomach. And then he said something that had nothing to do with property taxes or deeds. He said, Alisha, we need to talk about your daughter-in-law. You mean Maya? I asked, and I could feel a strange, cold dread seeping into the room, starting with my feet and working its way up. Robert cleared his throat. Well, that's the thing, Alisha. Her name isn't Maya Williams. I sank down into my favorite lazy boy recliner, but for the first time in its life, the worn leather offered no comfort at all. My ears started to buzz. Robert explained that while reviewing some minor power of attorney papers I'd recently signed, something Maya had insisted would make it easier for her to help me with bills, he'd noticed an inconsistency in her signature. On a hunch, his office ran a background check. The social security number she had provided was fake. Her real name is Catherine Blackwood Alisha, he said, and his voice was gentle, but the words were brutal. And she has quite a history. Catherine Blackwood. The name was a stone, dropped from a great height, hitting the placid, quiet surface of my life and sending out ripples that I knew, even then, would never, ever stop. After I hung up, I just sat there, motionless. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Its light fell on the silver-plated frame on the mantelpiece, a photo from James and Maya's wedding. Maya's smile was so bright, so utterly convincing. But looking at it now, I felt no warmth. I saw only a performance. Every kind word, every thoughtful gesture from the past 6 months started replaying in my mind. Her soft voice saying, "Oh, let me help you organize those bills, Alisha. It's no trouble at all." Her hand on my arm, "Why don't you let me hold on to your bank book? It'll be safer with me." I had mistaken it all for care. Now, I had to wonder, was it care or was it reconnaissance? I pushed myself out of the chair, my joints aching, and walked over to the fireplace. I picked up the frame, the metal cool against my skin. I stared into the smiling eyes of the woman I had welcomed into my family, the woman I had called my daughter, and a single question burned in my mind. Who are you really? My mind, now a crime scene, kept replaying old memories, dusting them for fingerprints I'd missed. And the first thing it landed on was David's desk. It was a beautiful, solid piece of walnut that had sat in the corner of our living room for 40 years. It was my husband's sanctuary. Every morning, I'd bring him his coffee, and he'd be sitting there, the newspaper spread out, the world making sense under his fingertips. The surface was a map of his life, marked with the faint scratches from his watch band as he leaned forward to read. It wasn't just furniture, it was the anchor of our home. About 2 months ago, Maya had approached me, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. She said my new apartment was a bit cramped, and maybe she could help me sell off a few of the older things. She said she'd take the money and put it into a safe investment fund just for me. We have to look to the future, Alisha, I remember her saying, her hand resting gently on my arm, not the past. I was hesitant, but her logic seemed so sound, so caring. So I agreed. The desk vanished a week later, along with David's small collection of vintage watches he kept in the top drawer. She told me she'd gotten a great price, and the money was already invested. Now, I have to ask myself, invested where? In a fund for my future, or in a savings account for Catherine Blackwood? Her manipulation was never a command. It was always an offer of help, wrapped in a bow of concern. I just want to make things easier for you, she'd say. She offered to help manage my monthly bills, saying it would be one less thing for me to worry about. I thought it was kind. Then one day, a letter arrived with a bright red final notice banner across the top. The power company was threatening to shut off my electricity. I was mortified. I called her in a panic, my voice shaking. Her own voice on the other end was a performance of shock and worry. "Oh my goodness, no!" she'd gasped. "It must be a mistake with the bank system. Or, Alisha, are you sure you gave me that bill?" She said it while James was in the room, and I saw the look on my son's face. It wasn't anger, it was pity. A soft, sad look that said, "My mother is starting to forget things." In that moment, I understood. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was methodically, patiently stealing my son's faith in me, one sugar-coated lie at a time. I started thinking about our Sunday dinners. It was a family tradition David and I had started when James was just a boy. After David passed, James and I kept it going. We could talk for hours about anything and everything. But that changed when Maya arrived. I remember trying to tell a story about a vacation David and I took to the Grand Canyon. I was just getting to the funny part, about the donkey that tried to eat my hat, when Maya deftly cut in. She'd ask James a question about his work, or bring up a movie she wanted to see, and just like that, my story would evaporate into thin air. Other times, if I spoke for too long, she would just go quiet. A heavy, judgmental silence that made the whole table uncomfortable. It was a punishment, and it was effective. I slowly began to feel that my stories, the very fabric of my life, were obsolete, boring. I started talking less, telling myself I was just trying to be considerate, to fit into this new family dynamic. But that wasn't the truth. I wasn't fitting in. I was being erased. My presence in my own family was becoming transparent, and I was the one helping it happen. Then, my memory jumped to just last week. A nagging feeling, a little whisper in my gut, told me to go to the bank myself. I wanted to see a printout of my recent transactions with my own eyes. The teller who helped me was a young woman named Sarah, someone who had always been so friendly and cheerful. But this time her smile was strained. She treated me with the kind of careful, deliberate slowness you'd use with a child. She looked at me with a pained expression and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Rose," she said, "your son and daughter-in-law asked us to be extra careful with your account. They mentioned you sometimes get a little confused." I felt the blood rush to my face. a hot wave of pure humiliation. To be talked about like that, to be stripped of my competence and painted as a confused old woman to a stranger. Maya had been one step ahead of me the entire time. She wasn't just building a wall between me and my son. She was building a fortress around my entire life, and she was locking me out. My book club has been my sanctuary for 15 years. We call ourselves the Novel Women. We talk about books, of course, but mostly we talk about life. Our children, our grandchildren, our worries, our joys. It's a circle of trust. But at our last meeting, the air felt different. When I made a small complaint, trying to make it sound like a joke, about how Maya was a little too strict with my finances, a strange quiet fell over the room. My friends, women I'd known for decades, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. It was Martha who finally told me the truth a few days later. Maya had called every single one of them. She had cried on the phone. She had spun a heartbreaking story about her deep concern for her mother-in-law, who was showing signs of paranoia and was convinced people were trying to steal her money. She had turned my valid fears into the ramblings of a senile old woman. In a few calculated phone calls, she had poisoned my last safe harbor, leaving me utterly alone in the storm she had created. And then, the coldest memory of all surfaced, the one that made my breath catch in my chest. One evening, Maya arrived with a thick leather-bound portfolio and a cheerful smile. "I had a lawyer draw up a family trust, Alisha," she announced. "It's a wonderful way to protect your assets from estate taxes." She spread the documents on the coffee table, the pages filled with dense legal language I couldn't possibly understand. She uncapped a pen and placed it in my hand. "You just need to sign right here." A flicker of my old self, of the woman who ran a household and managed finances with her husband for 40 years, sparked to life. I hesitated. I told her I wanted Robert to look it over first. The sunny smile on Maya's face vanished instantly. She let out a long, theatrical sigh and looked at James with wounded eyes. "I'm just trying to do what's best for your mother," she said softly. "But if she doesn't trust me—" James, my own son, immediately turned on me, his voice filled with frustration. "Mom, Maya is just trying to help. Why do you have to make everything so complicated?" The pressure from both of them, the weight of their disappointment, the guilt, it was suffocating. I almost signed it. I almost picked up that pen. Thinking back on it now sends a chill down my spine. That wasn't a document to protect my assets. It was a death warrant for my independence. Sleep refused to come that night. It was a black, suffocating blanket, and underneath it, my mind was a frantic carousel of lies and false smiles, spinning faster and faster until I felt dizzy with despair. I felt so small, so utterly powerless. And then, a quiet memory surfaced from the noise. It was Pastor John from last Sunday's service at the community church. I could almost hear his calm, steady voice in the darkness of my room. He'd said, "Even in the deepest night, the truth is a candle. It may not illuminate the whole world, but it is enough to see the next step." My generation, we were taught to be resilient. My parents, who had weathered the Great Depression with nothing but grit and determination, never complained. They just acted. I pushed the covers off, the cool night air a shock against my skin. I walked to the window and looked out at the silent, sleeping street, at the lonely pools of light cast by the street lamps. I didn't need a hurricane to fight this. I just needed a single candle, and in that quiet moment, I decided I would be the one to find the match. I have a small leather-bound notebook where I've recorded major expenses and important dates for years. It's a habit from a time when balancing a checkbook was a monthly ritual. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and found it tucked beneath a stack of old greeting cards. The familiar smell of old paper and dried ink was strangely calming. It was the scent of order, of control. I sat down at my little kitchen table and opened it to a fresh page. I didn't write about my feelings of betrayal or fear. I wrote facts, cold, hard facts. Date: Maya offers to manage bills. Date: David's desk is sold. Date: the conversation about the family trust. Every small detail, every incident that had felt odd or unsettling at the time, I wrote it all down in my neat practice script. The only sound in the apartment was the gentle, rhythmic scratching of my pen on the page. It wasn't the sound of despair. It was the opening shot of a quiet, methodical campaign for justice. I was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of confusion. I was a witness, and this was my first sworn statement. The next morning, I told James I was going to the community library to pick up a few new novels. It was a small, necessary lie. Instead, I took a bus to a different branch of my bank across town, one where nobody would know my face or the stories Maya might have told about me. I walked up to the counter and, with a voice much steadier than I felt, requested a detailed printout of my savings account activity for the past 6 months. Back in my apartment, I spread the pages out on the kitchen table, a magnifying glass in my trembling hand. And then I saw it, a single line item that made the air leave my lungs. A wire transfer for $50,000. It was made just 3 days after I had given them the check for their new life. But the recipient wasn't a wedding planner or a real estate agency. The money had been sent to a private account in Phoenix, Arizona. I'd never been to Phoenix. I didn't know anyone who lived there. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was it. This was the first piece of solid proof. Numbers don't have emotions. They don't know how to lie. And these numbers were telling a story that Catherine Blackwood most certainly did not want told. I knew then that I couldn't face this alone. I needed an ally, but it couldn't be one of my dear friends from the book club. Maya had already poisoned that well. My mind searched through its catalog of acquaintances and landed on Carol. We'd met in a community gardening club years ago. Her late husband had been a private investigator, and she'd absorbed some of his practical, no-nonsense worldview. She was a widow like me, and she had a mind like a steel trap. I called her. I didn't pour out the whole sordid tale over the phone. I just said I had some financial concerns and could use a second opinion from someone with a level head. We met at a small, quiet coffee shop downtown. After we ordered, I slid the bank statement across the table. Carol put on her reading glasses, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer a single word of pity. She just read, then looked up at me over the rims of her glasses, her gaze sharp and clear. "Alisha," she said, her voice low, "you need to be very, very careful. People like this, they don't play by any rules." Her words didn't frighten me. They validated me. They took my fear and shaped it from a formless, paranoid dread into a real, tangible threat that I could finally face. "You can't accuse her without more proof," Carol continued, stirring her tea. "You'll just look like the confused woman she wants everyone to think you are. You have to let her expose herself." And then she laid out a plan. It was simple, and it was brilliant. She told me to embrace the role Maya had cast for me. to play the part of the slightly senile, confused mother-in-law. She said I should ask Maya about the $50,000 charge, but with an air of innocent bewilderment. Maya, dear, Carol coached me. I was looking at this statement, and for the life of me, I can't remember what we used this $50,000 for. My memory is just getting so terrible these days. See how she reacts. See what story she tells. And, if you can, record the conversation. Carol's advice was a beacon of light. Instead of a frontal assault, I would use her own tactics against her. She was playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law. Fine. I would play the role of the forgetful matriarch. A play was about to begin, and for the first time, I wouldn't be the only one on stage wearing a mask. That evening, as I prepared for dinner with James and Maya, the familiar motions of cooking felt different. I seasoned the roast chicken, James's favorite, my hands moving on autopilot. Everything on the surface had to be perfectly normal, a calm sea belying the storm raging within me. Before they arrived, I slipped my smartphone into the deep pocket of my apron, the recording app already open and running. My hands were shaking just a little. I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. I saw a 68-year-old woman, her face etched with the lines of her life. But tonight, those lines felt less like wrinkles and more like battle scars. Tonight, I was more than just Alisha Rose. I was a mother, protecting her son from a predator. I was a wife, defending the legacy my husband and I had built together. And I was a woman, standing up to reclaim her own damn dignity. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime sounding like a starting gun. I took one last, deep breath. The curtain was going up. On the surface, dinner was perfect. The aroma of rosemary and roasted chicken filled my small apartment, a familiar comfort. Maya was her usual charming self, asking about my week with that focused intensity that made you feel so important. James was happy, relaxed, telling a funny story about a new project at his architecture firm. Laughter echoed off the walls. It was a perfect picture of a happy family. I waited, my heart a steady, heavy drum against my ribs, until dessert was served. My homemade apple pie, Maya's favorite. I watched them take their first few bites, savoring the sweetness. Then I set my fork down with a soft clink. I arranged my face into the most convincing mask of gentle confusion I could manage and looked at Maya. Maya, dear, could you help an old woman's memory for a moment? I began, letting my voice waver just a bit. I was trying to balance my books earlier, and there's one item I just can't place. A rather large one. $50,000. I simply can't recall what we spent it on. The change in the room was instantaneous and absolute. The cheerful chatter ceased. The air grew thick and heavy. James froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Maya slowly, deliberately, placed her own fork down beside her plate. Her smile tightened at the edges, just for a fraction of a second. I saw it, a flicker of pure animal panic in her eyes, before it was expertly smothered by a look of manufactured concern. She reached across the table and took my hand in hers. Her skin was cool. Her voice was a soft, sympathetic murmur. Oh, Alisha, sweetheart, that was the money for my student loans. We talked about it, don't you remember? I told you I wanted to start my new life with James completely free of debt. The lie was flawless. It was delivered with such sincerity, such warmth, that for a terrifying moment, I almost doubted myself. But she'd made a fatal error. I knew, with the kind of certainty that settles deep in your bones, that she had never, ever mentioned student loans to me. If she had, I would have been overjoyed for her. I would have written the check with a flourish. I continued my performance, looking down at our joined hands with a bewildered expression. Is that so? How strange. I don't remember that at all. I suppose my mind is really starting to go. That's when the knife came. Not from her, but from my son. He let out a long, weary sigh. "Mom, there you go again," he said, his voice edged with exasperation. "You're making Maya feel awkward." The words struck me with a physical force, a sharp, cold pain that radiated out from my chest. My own son, my James. He wasn't defending me. He was defending her. He believed her. Maya, the master performer, squeezed my hand tighter. "It's all right, darling," she cooed at James, never taking her concerned eyes off me. "Your mom is just worried. It's understandable." She then turned her full attention back to me. "Alisha, you know what? Why don't you let me help you for real? Starting tomorrow, you can give me all your financial papers, the bank statements, the bills, everything. I'll organize it all into a neat little system for you. That way, you won't ever have to worry about these confusing numbers again." It was a brilliant move, a checkmate delivered with a sweet smile. In front of her husband, she was the picture of a doting, responsible daughter-in-law, offering to lift a burden from her aging mother-in-law's shoulders. But I heard the true meaning loud and clear. She wanted total control. She wanted to seize my files, my records, my last remaining connection to my own life, and lock them away where I could never find the truth. I summoned a weak smile. "Thank you, dear. That's very thoughtful. Let me think about it." In the warm, quiet pocket of my apron, my phone had heard everything it needed to hear. Later, after they had said their goodbyes, I stood in the shadows of my hallway as I heard them talking just outside the apartment door. James's voice was low, laced with apology. "I'm sorry about all that, honey. My mom's been getting overly anxious lately." And then Maya's voice, as smooth and soft as velvet, but with a thread of steel running through it. "Shh, it's okay. It happens with people her age. We just need to be patient." A pause. "You know, maybe we should start thinking about a more formal power of attorney, just in case, for when she's not lucid anymore." I had to place a hand flat against the wall to keep myself upright. Not lucid. She was planting the seed in my son's mind that I was mentally incompetent, that I was losing my mind. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about erasing me as a person. She was planning to steal my legal rights, my very identity. I immediately sent the audio file to Robert. He called me back within minutes, his voice grim. "Alisha, the lie about the student loans is a good start. It establishes a pattern of deception, but it's her word against a recording. The Phoenix wire transfer, that's the key. That's the hard evidence." He told me he was hiring a private investigator in Arizona to trace the account. "In the meantime," he warned, his voice dropping, "you cannot let her know you suspect anything. Do you understand? You are in a much more dangerous situation than you realize." His words hung in the air long after we'd hung up. I sat in the dark, the city lights glittering coldly through my window, and I had never felt so profoundly alone. I was in a war for my own life, and the person I loved most in the world was standing on the other side. As the night bled into the earliest hours of the morning, I found myself pulling my old family Bible from the bookshelf. Its leather cover was worn soft from the hands of my mother and her mother before her. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was just looking for peace. I turned the thin, fragile pages until I found the Psalms my mother used to read to me when I was scared. My eyes fell upon the words of the 27th Psalm. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The ancient words, read by generations of people in their darkest hours, settled over me, and I understood something. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is acting in spite of it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I had the strength to see this through to the end, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not give up. I would not let the darkness win. I would be my own candle, no matter how hard the wind blew. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Robert, and the hesitation in his voice was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "Alisha, we have him," he said, and the words were devoid of triumph, spoken with the calm finality of a settled fact. "The owner of the account in Phoenix is a man named Mark Renshaw." Robert paused, letting the name hang in the air. "And here's the critical detail. Mr. Renshaw is not a university or a loan provider. He owns a high-end luxury car dealership." I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. He continued, "A red sports car, a convertible, was purchased with a cashier's check for $48,500. The purchase was made the day after the $50,000 wire transfer from your account hit his. A sports car, not student debt. In that instant, Maya's carefully constructed lie didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. The truth was a physical thing, a sharp pain of betrayal in my chest, but it was also a profound relief. Finally, I had something solid. I had a weapon. I knew I had to talk to James, and it had to be alone. I couldn't risk having Maya there, twisting my words, managing the narrative with her sad, wounded eyes. I called my son. I invited him to lunch at the little diner we used to go to every Saturday when he was a boy, the one with the red vinyl booths and the best cheeseburgers in town. I told a small lie of my own, saying I was feeling a bit lonely and just wanted some time with him, just the two of us. Perhaps feeling a sliver of guilt from that awful dinner, James agreed immediately. After I hung up, I stared at the files Robert had just emailed me. I printed every page, the bank statement with the highlighted wire transfer, the corporate filing for the car dealership, even a grainy photo of the shiny red sports car from the dealer's website. I slid the papers into a manila folder. This was no longer the rambling of a confused old mother. This was the cold, hard, documented truth. We sat in our usual booth, the comforting smell of grilling meat and onions wrapping around us like a memory. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. James was smiling, telling me about a new building he was designing, his hands sketching shapes in the air as he spoke. He was so full of life, so happy. I hated that I was the one who had to shatter the moment, but I had no choice. I waited for the waitress to set down our milkshakes, then I pushed the manila folder across the sticky tabletop. "James," I said, my voice even and calm, "I need you to look at this, and I need you to hear me out, just this once, without interrupting." The smile vanished from his face, replaced first by confusion and then by a flash of irritation as he saw the official-looking documents. He opened the folder. As he read, I began to speak. I laid out the facts, one by one, like placing stones in a row. I told him about the $50,000 transfer. I reminded him of Maya's story about her student loans. And then I told him about a man named Mark Renshaw and a red sports car in Phoenix, Arizona. I kept my voice flat. I presented no theories. I made no accusations. I simply recited the facts. I let the papers in his hands do the talking for me. When I finished, he looked up from the documents, and the look in his eyes broke my heart. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't even anger at Maya. It was a deep, frustrated disappointment, and it was directed entirely at me. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice low and tight with disbelief. "Did you have my wife investigated? Are you serious?" He shook his head, pushing the folder away as if it were contaminated. "There has to be a reasonable explanation for this. Maybe Maya bought the car for a relative and didn't want to bother you with the details. You can't just jump to these insane conclusions." The sheer force of his denial, his desperate need to believe the lie, was more painful than anything Maya had ever done. I had laid the truth at his feet, irrefutable and documented, and my son had chosen to turn away from it. He chose the beautiful illusion over the ugly reality. I thought I had failed. The rest of our lunch was a strained, silent affair. He barely touched his food. I paid the bill, my heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. But as we stood up to leave, as he was shrugging on his coat, I saw him do it. He glanced back at the manila folder sitting on the table. For a second, I thought he was going to leave it, but he didn't. He picked it up, folded it deliberately, and slipped it into the side pocket of his briefcase. He did it without looking at me, but I saw it. And I knew. I knew that despite his angry words, despite his loyalty to her, a seed had been planted. A tiny poisonous seed of doubt. He couldn't unsee what he had seen. He would go home tonight. He would look at the woman he loved, and the image of a red sports car in Phoenix, Arizona, would be there, hovering between them. I had done all I could. The next step was his to take. I could only pray he was strong enough to take it. Driving home, the silence in my car was deafening. You know, the cruelest thing in the world isn't being deceived by a stranger. It's when you try to protect someone you love with the truth, and they look at you like you're the enemy. Have you ever been there? Pleading with someone to see what's right in front of them, but their eyes are just closed? If you have a story, please share it in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not the only one fighting that battle is the greatest strength of all. The call came late that night. It was James, and his voice was a ghost of itself, frayed and broken. "Mom," I asked her. I could hear a choked-back sob on the other end of the line, a sound that pierced right through me. She said you framed her, that you fabricated all of those documents just to break us up." The accusation was so fantastically absurd I almost let out a sharp, bitter laugh, but the raw pain in my son's voice caught it in my throat. This is the final gambit of the cornered manipulator, to reverse the roles of victim and aggressor, to paint themselves as the one who has been wronged. I gripped the receiver, my own voice coming out steadier than I felt. "James," I said, keeping my tone low and calm, "the truth doesn't need to scream. You look into her eyes and you listen to your own heart. You ask yourself who is telling the truth." He told me later what happened, painting a scene of such ugliness it was hard to imagine it taking place in his beautiful new home. He said when he confronted her, when he laid the folder out on their polished kitchen island, she didn't even attempt an explanation. She went straight to war. The sweet, gentle Maya he knew vanished, replaced by a stranger with a twisted, snarling face. He said she screamed at him, cursed at him with words he'd never heard her use. She swept the papers off the counter, sending them scattering across the floor. "You believe your mother over your own wife?" she had shrieked, her voice venomous. "After everything I've done for you? For this family?" It was a masterclass in emotional terrorism, weaponizing guilt, shame, and love. She wasn't answering a question about the truth. She was issuing an ultimatum about his loyalty. And my son, my poor, conflicted son, was being torn in two. But in her blind panic, she made a fatal miscalculation. Trying to regain control, she declared that she would call the university's financial aid office right then and there to prove the student loan debt was real. The seed of doubt I had planted had taken root. The James from a week ago might have accepted that. But this James, armed with the cold facts from my folder, just looked at her and said, "Okay, call them. Put it on speakerphone." The bluff was called. Of course, she couldn't make the call. The rage instantly collapsed into a flood of desperate tears. She accused him of breaking her heart, of destroying the trust between them. Then, in a final dramatic flourish, she ran upstairs to their bedroom and slammed the door, leaving James standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of his beautiful illusion. The next morning, she came downstairs with her eyes swollen and red. She told James she needed space, that she was going to a friend's house for a few days to think. She was carrying a large duffel bag. As she walked past him towards the front door, he told me he noticed something sticking out of the unzipped top of the bag. It was the corner of the pearl necklace I had given her on her wedding day, a family heirloom that had been my mother's. Tucked beside it, he could see the glint of other pieces of jewelry. In her haste to flee the fire she had started, her true nature was laid bare. She wasn't just leaving, she was looting. She was taking not just her own things, but the symbols of the family she was abandoning, the very history she had pretended to cherish. The moment the front door clicked shut, James told me he bolted upstairs. He called me, his voice thin and panicked. "Mom, she's gone. And she took all her jewelry, even the things you gave her." There was a pause. I heard the sound of a drawer being yanked open, a frantic rustling. "Oh, God," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Oh, Mom. No, our joint savings passbook, it's gone." And that was it. That was the moment the floor gave way beneath his feet. There were no more lies to hide behind, no more beautiful illusions to cling to. There was only the key, brutal, undeniable truth. The woman he loved, the woman he had defended against his own mother, had just emptied their future into her duffel bag and vanished. He was at my door less than 20 minutes later. The confident, happy man I'd had lunch with just the day before was gone. In his place was a shattered stranger. He collapsed onto my sofa, buried his head in his hands, and wept with the kind of heartbroken, racking sobs I hadn't heard from him since he was a small boy who had fallen off his bicycle. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he choked out between breaths. "I was so blind. You were right. You were right all along, and I wouldn't listen." I sat down beside him, wrapping my arms around his shaking shoulders, pulling him close. There was no victory in this moment, no satisfaction in being right. There was only the profound ache of seeing my child in so much pain. But through that shared pain, something lost was found again. A connection I feared was broken forever was being reforged in the fire. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, rocking him gently. "It's going to be okay. We're going to face this now, together." My personal battle with Maya was over, but the long, difficult war to reclaim justice and to heal my family was just beginning. Robert arranged the meeting. The next day, James and I found ourselves sitting in a small, sterile room at the police station. The air was cold, and the relentless hum of the overhead fluorescent lights seemed to buzz right under my skin. We sat across a metal table from a man named Detective Davis. He was a middle-aged man with weary lines etched around his eyes, but the eyes themselves were sharp, missing nothing. For the better part of an hour, he listened, his expression unchanging, as we recounted the entire story from the very beginning. He took the manila folder I'd prepared and examined each page with a practiced, methodical patience. When he got to the background check, his eyes stopped on the name, Catherine Blackwood. He looked up from the paper, his gaze settling on me. "Mrs. Rose," he said, his voice a low gravel, "do you have any idea who you're dealing with? This is not some small-time con artist." For the first time in months, I felt the profound, bone-deep relief of being truly believed. But mixed with that relief was a new and unfamiliar chill of fear. Detective Davis leaned forward, his hands clasped out on the table. He revealed that Catherine Blackwood was a known high-level player in a sophisticated nationwide marriage fraud ring. Their operation was chillingly efficient. They targeted single, financially stable men, particularly those with wealthy or vulnerable family members. Catherine, he explained, was just one of their top operatives. There were dozens of other Mayas out there, all expertly trained in seduction, psychological manipulation, and asset extraction. The numbers the detective quoted were staggering, making our own personal nightmare feel like just one chapter in a much larger, darker story. Over 20 confirmed victims across multiple states, a total estimated loss of more than $10 million. My quest for answers about my own family had inadvertently lifted the corner of a rug, revealing a sprawling criminal enterprise underneath. But it was the detective's next statement that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. He tapped a finger on the printout of my financial statement. "Mrs. Rose, based on their established MO, we don't believe your son was the primary target." He looked from me to James, then back again. "We believe he was the gateway." The words didn't make sense at first. The detective clarified. "With your remaining assets, the fact that Catherine, or Maya, stuck around as long as she did is unusual. We believe you were the end game, the main prize. Her entire plan was to secure your trust through James, systematically isolate you, gain control of your entire estate, and then remove you from the picture. Every kind gesture, every thoughtful word, every concerned look from Maya replayed in my mind, but now with a horrifying new filter. The sketchers, the reminders about my medication, the offers to help with my bills. It wasn't just about winning over a mother-in-law. It was the calculated grooming of a target. All of it, from the very beginning, had been for me. "Remove me?" James stammered, the color draining from his face. Detective Davis gave a single grim nod. "It's a pattern we've seen before. Once they secure power of attorney or get their name written into a will, an unfortunate accident intends to happen. A tragic fall down the stairs, a sudden, unexpected heart attack, something that can be easily dismissed given the victim's age." A shiver, cold and violent, shot down my spine. I saw her face in my mind. That night she'd pushed the thick stack of legal documents towards me, the pen in her hand. You just need to sign right here. That document wasn't a key to my financial security. It was a potential death warrant. This was never just about the money. It was never just about my dignity. This whole time, it had been about my life. Detective Davis leaned back in his chair, his weary eyes fixed on me. Catherine is smart, very smart. She's vanished without a trace, just like she always does. We've been on her trail for months, but she's a ghost. We've never had enough direct evidence to bring her in. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the small room. But now we have you. She still thinks you're the perfect mark. A confused, forgetful old woman who can be easily manipulated. She has no idea that you see her for exactly who she is. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. Mrs. Rose, you are our best and only chance to catch her, to dismantle this whole network. We need you to be the bait. The proposition hung in the air, audacious and terrifying. To willingly walk back into the lion's den, to make myself a target. It was the most insane thing I had ever heard. I turned and looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, but underneath it, I saw a profound and agonizing regret. He reached across the table and grabbed my hand, his grip tight. Mom, no, he pleaded, his voice cracking. It's too dangerous. Absolutely not. But as I looked at his broken face, my own resolve hardened into steel. This was bigger than me now. It was for James, to help him find a way to heal from this. It was for the 20 other families who had been torn apart. And it was for all the families who might be next if we did nothing. This wasn't just my story anymore. I turned my head back to face the detective, my fear receding, replaced by a strange and unfamiliar calm. What do I have to do? I asked. In that moment, something inside me shifted forever. I was no longer Alisha Rose, the widow, the mother, the retired homemaker. I was a soldier, and I was ready for one last fight. The plan the police devised was simple, which is precisely what made it so terrifying. My role was to call Catherine. My performance had to be flawless. I was to become the panicked, confused mother-in-law she had always believed me to be. The script was rooted in a kernel of truth. I would tell her that James had found the power of attorney papers I'd accidentally signed and was furious. I was scared. I didn't understand the legal jargon. I needed her, his loving wife, to come back and explain everything to him, to smooth things over. The entire premise relied on my ability to convince her that I was still her staunchest ally, now isolated and terrified of our own son. In essence, I had to willingly embody a caricature of the helpless, dependent victim she had worked so hard to create. My greatest weakness, as she perceived it, was about to become my only weapon. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The police had already connected their recording and tracing equipment to my landline. Detective Davis stood a few feet away, his presence a strange mix of reassurance and immense pressure. He gave me a short, sharp nod. It was time. I took a breath that felt too small for my lungs and dialed the number. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. It rang twice, 3 times, and on the 4th ring, she answered. Hello? Her voice was crisp, guarded, and cold. There was none of the warmth of Maya in it. This was Catherine. I threw myself into the role, summoning every ounce of fear and betrayal I had felt over the past few weeks and channeling it into my voice. I made it tremble. I let a teary-eyed waver creep into my words as I launched into a frantic, pleading monologue. Maya, thank God, you have to come back, I cried, letting a sob catch in my throat. It's James. He's gone mad. He found the papers. He thinks I've given you all our money. He's yelling. I don't know what to do. You have to come explain it to him. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. In that silence, I could almost hear the gears turning in her calculating mind, weighing the odds, sniffing the air for the scent of a trap or the irresistible aroma of an opportunity. It was time to set the hook. I let my voice drop to a conspiratorial, terrified whisper. Maya, I already signed the main power of attorney documents you left. All of them. Now James is threatening to sue both of us. He wants to have me declared incompetent. I'm so scared, Maya, please. That was the bait she could not resist. A signed power of attorney. It was the master key to my entire life savings, the jackpot she had been working towards all along. The change in her voice was instantaneous. The cold suspicion melted away, replaced by the familiar, syrupy warmth of concern. Oh my goodness, Alisha, you poor thing. Don't you worry about a thing, she purred. You did the right thing, protecting your assets. You let me handle James. I'll be right over. Where are you? She had taken the bait. The hook was set, but as I placed the receiver back in its cradle, I felt no surge of victory, only a profound, soul-deep chill. I had just willingly invited the wolf back across my threshold. For the next few hours, my quiet, comfortable apartment was transformed into something unrecognizable. It became a stage. Plainclothes officers moved with a silent, ghostly efficiency, their footsteps muffled on my carpets. They planted tiny, button-sized cameras in the spine of a book on my mantelpiece and behind a floral arrangement on the end table. A microphone was taped discreetly to the underside of the coffee table. Across the street, a surveillance team settled into an unremarkable-looking utility van, their eyes now my eyes. Detective Davis walked me through my blocking. I was to sit in my lazy boy recliner, facing the door. James would not be present. His absence would make my story of being isolated and afraid all the more believable. Just keep her talking, Mrs. Rose, Davis instructed, his voice low. Get her to acknowledge the power of attorney. That's what we need to hear her say. Once we have it on tape, we'll move in. My home, my sanctuary was now a trap, and I was the cheese. The waiting was the purest form of torture. The minutes stretched and warped, each one an hour long, every creak in the old building's hallway, every distant siren sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I picked up a novel, but the words blurred into meaningless squiggles on the page. My mind drifted to David. What would he think of all this? And then I smiled a sad little smile. He wouldn't be surprised at all. He always used to tell me, Alisha, you have a spine of solid steel. You just forget it's there sometimes. My hand went to the small silver cross I always wear, its surface worn smooth from years of touch. I closed my fingers around it, the cool metal a small solid anchor in a sea of fear. I didn't pray for my safety. I prayed for strength, for the courage to see this through, to speak the lines I needed to speak and to not fall apart. And then it came, a soft, gentle knock on the door, almost polite. It was her. A profound silence fell over the room, as if the entire world was holding its breath. I heard Detective Davis's voice. A tiny, tinny whisper from the concealed earpiece in my ear. "She's here, Mrs. Rose. Remember the script. We are right here with you." I took a single, shuddering breath, the air burning in my lungs. I pushed myself up from my chair and walked the 10 longest steps of my life to the door. When I pulled it open, she was standing there. Maya, Catherine. She gave me that familiar, radiant smile, the one brimming with so much warmth and care. But this time, I didn't see a loving daughter-in-law. I saw the cold, dead eyes of a predator. I saw a venomous snake, charming me right before the strike. "Alisha," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy as she stepped inside. "I'm here now. Everything is going to be okay." The final act was about to begin. I opened the door and let her in, my body moving with a strange, disconnected calm. Catherine swept past me, her eyes doing a quick professional scan of the room, checking for threats, for witnesses. She settled onto the sofa and immediately took my hand in hers, her face a perfect mask of loving concern. Now, you mustn't be afraid," she began, her voice a soothing balm of poison. "That power of attorney is perfectly legal. You gave me the right to manage your assets to protect them from James's impulsive decisions. You did the right thing, Alisha." There it was, an admission. I heard the faintest confirmation click in my earpiece. I kept my own hand limp and trembling in hers. "But he won't believe me," I whimpered, letting my voice crack. He says you tricked me." Catherine let out a small, contemptuous laugh, a sound I had never heard from her before. It was sharp and ugly. "James is too soft," she said with a dismissive wave of her free hand. "He doesn't understand business. You and I, Alisha, we understand. This money, your legacy, it will be safe with me." That was my cue. I slowly lifted my head and looked directly into her eyes. The performance was over. My voice, when it came out, was not the quavering whisper of a frightened old woman. It was calm, level, and as cold as a winter morning. "Will it be as safe as the red sports car in Phoenix, Catherine?" The name, my voice, the question, it all hit her at once. She physically recoiled as if I had slapped her. The concerned smile on her face didn't fade. It froze, a grotesque plaster mask. Her eyes widened, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks. I could see the sequence of emotions flash across her face. Utter confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, the wild, cornered animal panic I had been waiting for. What did you just say?" she stammered, her grip on my hand suddenly gone. Her play was over, and it was my turn to take back the stage. "I know your real name," I continued, my voice remaining unnervingly steady. I felt a strange power building inside me, a strength I never knew I possessed. "I know about the marriage fraud ring. I know about the 20 other victims whose lives you've destroyed. I know you never had a single dollar of student loan debt. And I know," I said, leaning forward just an inch, "that your ultimate target was always me." Each "I know" was a heavy, deliberate step, forcing her backward into a corner of her own making. The blood drained from her face, leaving a pasty white canvas that was quickly flooded with the crimson of pure rage. The mask of Maya, the sweet, caring daughter-in-law, didn't just fall off. It shattered. What was left was the true face of a greedy, cruel monster. "You stupid old woman," she hissed, the words spitting from her lips like venom. "You've ruined everything." In that moment, I felt a surge of power I've never known. To stand up to the person who has tried to erase you, to see the fear in their eyes where once you only saw your own, it's a feeling that changes you. I'm sure in your own life you faced injustice, big or small. Do you remember the moment you decided you would not be silent any longer? I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments. Those stories of quiet courage are what give the rest of us strength. Catherine lunged to her feet, her body radiating a desperate fury. She stalked towards me, her finger jabbing the air. You think you can stop me? I have a signed power of attorney. It's all mine. It's legal. She raised her hand, and for a fleeting second, the old fear returned. I flinched, expecting the sting of a slap. But then I looked past her hand and into her eyes. All I saw was desperation. She was bluffing. She had already lost, and she knew it. The fear vanished, replaced by a spine of solid steel I didn't know I had. It's not yours, I said, and my voice was the steadiest it had been in my entire life. It belongs to the memory of my husband. It belongs to the future of my son. And it is something you will never, ever touch. As if my words were a signal, the apartment door burst open with a deafening crack. It flew inward, slamming against the wall. In the same instant, the living room was flooded with dark uniforms and drawn weapons. Detective Davis was the first one through, his voice booming through the chaos. Catherine Blackwood, you're under arrest! Catherine let out one final guttural scream of pure as impotent rage as two officers seized her arms, forcing them behind her back with a sharp metallic click of handcuffs. They marched her past me. She turned her head, her face a contorted mask of hatred. She spat my name, but the fear was gone. I felt nothing. I simply watched her, not with triumph, not with pity, but with a strange and profound serenity. The storm was over. I stood there, in my own living room, surrounded by the quiet efficiency of the police officers. The stage was being dismantled. The cameras would be taken down. The actors were gone. It was no longer a set. It was my home again. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly safe. A few months later, I found myself sitting in the front row of a courtroom. The air was thick with the institutional smell of old paper and cheap wood polish. James sat beside me, his shoulder pressed firmly against mine, a silent, solid presence. Catherine Blackwood and several of her associates were sentenced that day. The judge, a woman with a stern but fair face, read the verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. The list of charges was long: grand larceny, conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud. The sentences were severe. As the gavel came down with a final echoing crack, I didn't feel a surge of joy. There was no elation, no triumphant cheer rising in my throat. There was only a quiet, profound, and deeply welcome sense of release. It was the feeling of a great weight, one I hadn't even realized I was still carrying, finally being lifted from my soul. A dark, painful chapter of my life had been closed, not with the angry slam of revenge, but with the quiet, decisive click of justice, acknowledged and upheld by the law. We eventually recovered some of the money, but by then it felt like an afterthought. It was never really about the money. What we had truly lost, and what we finally got back that day, was our peace. James's road to healing was longer and more difficult than my own. The betrayal he felt, The realization that his love had been a carefully constructed lie left a deep and jagged scar on his heart. But the storm that had almost torn us apart, in the end, was what brought us back together. We began to talk again, truly talk, not just about the weather or his work, but about our fears, our regrets, our mistakes. We rebuilt the bridge between us, one honest conversation at a time. Then one afternoon, he came to my apartment carrying a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. He set it on the coffee table and pushed it towards me. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a vintage wristwatch, its gold case gleaming. It was almost identical to one of David's that had been sold. "It's not Dad's," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I can never replace what was lost, but I wanted you to have a piece of that memory back." Tears welled in my eyes as I lifted it from the box. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. He wasn't just giving me a watch. He was giving me back a piece of our shared history. We weren't just rebuilding trust. We were forging a new, stronger relationship from the ashes of the old one. My story, in a simplified form, was published in the local newspaper as part of a larger piece on the fraud ring. A few weeks later, something unexpected began to happen. I started receiving letters, then emails, then phone calls. They came from women all over the state, and then from farther away. They were mothers, grandmothers, sisters, women who had been through similar betrayals, who had felt the sting of being dismissed and disbelieved, or who were trapped in situations they didn't know how to escape. They all said the same thing, that my story had given them the courage to speak up, to seek help, to believe in their own intuition. It was then that I realized my pain didn't have to be a wound that festered in the dark. It could be a lantern. Working with Carol and a few other women from my church, we started a small support group at the local community center, a safe place for women to share their stories, to warn each other, to find resources and strength. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And now I was becoming a guide. If this long and painful journey has taught me anything, it is this: love does not require blindness. True love, the fierce love of a parent for a child, demands that we be clear-eyed. It means being wise enough to protect those we hold dear, and just as importantly, to protect ourselves. And if I could say one thing to the younger people who might be listening, it would be this: when your mother, your father, your grandmother tells you they have a fear, a worry, a bad feeling, even if it sounds irrational, even if it goes against everything you want to believe, please, just for a moment, listen. Don't dismiss it. Don't roll your eyes. Take the time to truly hear them. Sometimes, a lifetime of experience and intuition can see a danger that youth and love are blind to. Your willingness to listen might be the very lifeline they need to pull themselves and you to safety. Last month, I decided to move, not because I was running from bad memories, but because I was running toward a new beginning. I found a lovely smaller apartment in a quieter part of town. It has a wide, sunny balcony, perfect for the potted geraniums I love so much. James helped me with the move. On the last day, after all the boxes were unpacked, we carried my old, familiar Lazy Boy recliner into the living room. We positioned it by the sliding glass door, overlooking a new view of green trees and open sky. I sank into its worn, comfortable cushions and looked around at my new life, at the sunlight streaming in, and I smiled. This was my life. I had fought for it. I had earned it. I had paid a terrible price, but in doing so, I had learned the true measure of my own worth, my own dignity, and my own future. And it was a future that was finally all mine. My little apartment, with its sunny balcony, has truly become my sanctuary. And in the quiet moments here, I've realized that telling my story was only the first step. The next is listening. I know sometimes when we sit down together, the stories just pour out like a river. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and I truly hope to hear the stories of all the women, all the mothers, listening right now. You know, it's funny how these things work. A simple click of a button, a like, a subscribe, or a share. It might seem like such a small, fleeting gesture to many, but to me, and to so many quiet voices that need to be heard, each one of those clicks is a little flicker of light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It's a reminder that we are not invisible. Just a simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it's the motivation that keeps me sharing these stories. After I finally told my story, something shifted in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to truly listen to my heart. And now that you have, I realize the thing I want most is to listen to yours. Down below, in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt you weren't being heard. Tell me about a passion you have that others might have thought was silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, quietest way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your story matters. That's what we want to build here at Sapphire Revenge, a community where we can share the stories that come from deep within our hearts. I know you have your own private stories, things that are sometimes hard to share even with family or friends. I'm here to listen, to share in your joys and your sorrows, because we all deserve the dignity of being heard. And if you don't have a sad story like the one I've lived through, please share a happy one. Tell me about a small joy you experienced today. Let's share that too. It will be a powerful source of motivation, helping me and everyone else watching to heal and find faith and strength in our lives. And if you happen to be watching this on your television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these moments with you. Let's build this community together, a place where we can be honest with our feelings. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman ever has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her victories are invisible. Thank you again for sitting here with me. It truly means the world.